Today we're going to do a book review of Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. So I'm going to put timestamps below for all the things I'm going to talk about, but the things I'm going to be going over that I can think of at the moment, and if there's any more, it'll be below in the description, is the plot, the characters, the magic system, the writing, the pacing, and the audiobook. Let's start out by saying that this is one of Brandon Sanderson's standalone novels. He is planning on writing more in this series, but you can read this book as a standalone. It was originally written as a standalone. The context of the novel completes itself. It does leave a door open, which is why I could definitely see him being able to write in this universe more, but yeah, it definitely stands on its own. Let's talk about this as an entry point into Brandon Sanderson. I have read Mistborn, the Mistborn trilogy, the first era, and then I've read this. People kind of say, well, if you want to read a standalone first, read this, but if you want to get into him with a series, read Mistborn. And I don't think you could go wrong either way, really, because, I mean, this is a review of Warbreaker, so I don't want to get into it too much, but Mistborn in itself, the first book, really wraps itself up in the same way Warbreaker wraps itself up. So I don't think that you need to read books 2 and 3 of Mistborn to appreciate book 1. You'll get more context for book 1. So I think that this is a good entry point. I think that's also a good entry point. Okay, how do I want to get into the plot of this book? That this is a high fantasy novel, and in this world, there are 2 major cities that we're discussing. One of them, it's very gray, it's very conservative. People dress conservatively, people act conservatively. Color is seen as like vivacious and frowned upon. And then there's this other city that lives in color, lives in technicolor, and this comes into play, this idea of color comes into play because of the magic system, and the magic uses breath and it uses color. So this gray city, Idris, and Talir, I don't remember. There's an exiled kingdom of Idris within the larger kingdom of Talir, and Idris is the one that, and I'm sorry if I'm saying these things wrong, Idris is the gray city and Talir is the colorful city. Idris is kind of like an annexed kingdom within Talir, and these 2 places do not get along. It's kind of like there's a kingdom within a kingdom. We have 2 princesses from this said gray Idris kingdom who are our 2 main characters who, through circumstances, end up in Talir, and we follow both of their perspectives. We also follow the perspective of a god, Lightsong. So there's 3 major perspectives we're following. All of them are told in third person. Is there anything else I want to say about plot? How do I want to describe where the plot goes? I guess that's all I really want to say, is just that you meet these characters, you go to this kingdom, there's political intrigue, that's the main part of this, and the plot ensues from there. Let's talk about the characters from there. You have your 2 princesses, Vivenna and Ciri, and they both, upon entering this kingdom, are in transitional phases of their life, and there's a lot of learning that they both do. One through learning through the courts and learning to live in the high society, and one through being on the streets in a capacity and learning the underbelly of this society. And then you have Lightsong, who through him you learn about the gods and how all of the gods interact with each other a bit, and it's a bit more on the political intrigue side of being actually in the politics of things. You learn a lot about how society works. So the characters themselves, I just really adored them. Vivenna had a really great transformation for me. She learned a lot. Ciri as well. I really like how Brandon Sanderson writes more powerful women. And then Lightsong, he's just sarcastic and infuriating to the people around him because he doesn't like being a god, and it was just like a pleasure being in his perspective. He was a big comic relief of the book. And then the side characters too, just Vasher and Denth and Bluefinger, just all of these characters who are side characters to these main protagonist plots, but really matter to the story and the character arcs. They were also just so realistic, so lived in, they were just like such full-fledged characters with very obvious flaws. There is a part in here that I don't want to get into too much, but just Vivenna goes through something, and the exploration of her interacting with the city and with this kingdom through that lens of what she's going through was so interesting to me, and what was one of my favorite parts of the book. Let's get into pacing. I felt like there wasn't a scene that wasn't needed. Everything felt like it was building up to something, and that's one thing that I find with Brandon Sanderson's books, that they're really great. They're long, like, yeah, this is over 600 pages, it's pretty chunky, but everything felt purposeful, everything felt like I was learning something new, just the pace was good, we were building upon the characters, we were getting twists and turns in the plot that I was not expecting. There are multiple that happened in the book, and it kind of like reinvigorated the plot where it was like, oh shit, where is this gonna go next? Yeah, and then the ending was just kind of a banger. So it got wild. There was just a ton going on. It really built up to a climax where tons of stuff happened. I think that one thing you can say with building that sort of pacing, I think it's hard to get around this, but there was a lot of conveniences, that people having to be in the right place at the right time, and everything having to just come together perfectly, which I guess you could say is a negative if it feels too convenient to you, but in order to get kind of like this cinematic ending that this really had, I think that you need to do stuff like that. So it's just a matter of preference, I think. What else do I want to talk about? Okay, I guess in the context of characters, I do want to talk about the audiobook, because that's how I consumed this. I don't remember the audiobook narrator, but I'll put her name on the screen. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about the audiobook, because I really like the Mistborn ones, and this is a different audiobook narrator, but she was really great. All the character voices were very distinct. You didn't have to tell me who was talking with the he said, like Vasher said, Denth said. I didn't need that, because I can tell based off of the voice that she was using, which is just always just a breath of fresh air with audiobooks. I love when narrators are actually really good at narrating different voices. So if you like audiobooks, I just love consuming my fantasy through audiobooks, especially with Brandon Sanderson's writing style. So I guess we could get into that. He is very to the point. There's no fluff in his writing. He is not describing rooms. He's not, I heard, who was talking about it? I don't know. I'll link the video above where they were talking about objective versus subjective reviews. And one thing that they brought up was writing style, and Brandon Sanderson's being like a glass window where it's just like that's all you're getting, and someone else's, like Patrick Rothfuss's, being like stained glass. You're really just getting it to get the characters and to get the plot across. There's not much else to it, which for fantasy and just really in general, I don't need purple prose every book I read, but if you do, then you're not going to get that here. Let's talk about the world building. I would say that it's not, of all the things that Brandon Sanderson does, it's not like his strongest suit. He's not focusing on really drawing your eye to all of the aspects of the world. However, it does feel like a real world. I felt like I could see the city, but not because he described it to a T, just because I've been to enough cities where it was easy for me, based on what he was telling me, to come up with a world in my head. So the world itself was interesting. It felt present, but its world building is not his main focus. I think what he tends to focus on more is magic systems. Okay, popping in a little bit later, I think that I just want to clarify what I'm saying here a little bit. I think that the world building itself is interesting, and what I'm more so talking about here is atmosphere. Like, it's not a super atmospheric read. He definitely builds a world, and the world itself is interesting, but I don't feel like I lived in it and I can see and feel everything in it, because he just doesn't really bring your eye there, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to consider if that's really what you're looking for in a fantasy read. So the magic system, and I keep comparing this to Mistborn, it's helpful to contextualize for me. So the magic system in here relies on breaths, which is hard to describe. You can have like a psychological or philosophical conversation about what breaths are in here, and people are born with breath in this. I almost want to relate it to a soul. Like, people are born with this breath in them, this liveliness in them, but you can get rid of your breath. Like, you can give up your breath to someone, like they have to do for the gods to survive in here. You can give up your breath and you're still alive, and then you can accrue breath. So some people will accrue maybe 10 breaths, maybe hundreds of breaths, and in the back of this book it tells you what level you are with each amount of breath you have. Let me just find it. You can heighten to different levels based on the number of breaths you have, and at the first level, which is 50, you have aura recognition. The second, 200, perfect pitch. The third, 600, perfect color recognition, and so on. And the gods are already heightened to, I think, level 5. Yep, which gives them agelessness. Okay, so then the breaths are important because they're how you use your magic. So you need breath and you need color, and through those things together, you can awaken objects and use them in different settings. And we learn about this through the context of one of our characters learning how to use their magic, which I appreciate in a book because it tends to require the author to break it down to more rudimentary levels to be able to explain the magic system to the character that's learning it, and then for us as viewers to get that basic knowledge as well. I think that if you want to read a book for the magic system, you might be slightly disappointed because you don't get to see the magic, you do get to see it in places at the beginning with a certain character. But overall, you don't really get to see the magic system until about halfway through the book, and you know going into the end of the book that there is so much about this magic system that is unexplained. In that aspect, it feels like the books have so much more room to grow into the magic system and into the lore. I feel like there's the base where you almost know as a reader, like, yes, Sanderson's thought about this. He has like a goal with his magic system, but he didn't get into it all here. That's where I think a sequel could head. I don't know how I missed this in my original discussion, but a big part of the themes of this book are culture and religion, and this is kind of explored through the lens of the characters. So in the Two Kingdoms, there's different religions that people follow, and in Idris, they follow something more similar to Christianity, where you don't have interaction with your gods. And in Talir, there's the actual gods that live and exist. And you see this through the lens of the princesses who follow one religion and go to a place and experience a new one. And you also see this through Lightsong, the god that you follow, and his doubts of if he's really a god and if he's really a religious figure. You also see, because of the differences in religion, or maybe it's not a causal relationship, but there's also a lot of differences in the cultures of the two places, and you experience that firsthand with the characters as they have like culture shock when they move to this new place, and how some of them, or one of them, gets used to it quicker, and the other it resists it more and maybe thinks that morally their religion or their culture is better than the other one, and has a lot of cognitive dissonance in having to embrace it when they don't really want to. Final thought. I really loved this book. I had such a fun time with it. It's just such a fun romp. It was greatly paced. I was constantly intrigued. The way it bounced from character to character and kind of like left you on a cliffhanger constantly was just such motivation to pick it back up, which I don't always like in books, but I did enjoy in this one. I really loved the characters. Yeah, I thought the audiobook was really superbly done. And then I'm not going to get into spoilers, but I just the way the ending like wrapped up was really, really nice for me. It felt like everything fell into place really well. The multiple perspectives made more sense once we got to that place. I think it was harder for me to like come up with cons or be maybe more objective. I know it's a whole conversation on reviews aren't objective, but I quite honestly had a hard time coming up with faults with this book just based on what it was trying to be. It's trying to be a high fantasy novel that's fast-paced and focuses on characters and magic. I think it accomplished that well. Okay, if you've read this book, did you like it? Do you agree with my takes on it? Or do you think that this is a good entry point into Brandon Sanderson? And if you haven't read this, are you planning to? And do you think that this is where you would enter, or do you think you would enter with one of his other books? I think that's all I got. So until next time, happy reading.